Hi, I'm Dale Sherbeck, and welcome to the HQ, a CHA Learning and Healthcare Can podcast serial where we dive into healthcare issues and topics from the perspective of its people and discuss them with those that are leading in the health system. Together, we'll try to unpack these topics and learn what actions are being taken to innovatively solve them today. Increasingly, hardly a day goes by where at least one mainstream media source isn't publishing another important story about the health and wellness of our health workforce. Headlines are replete with words like burnout, exhausted, beleaguered, and at the same time, we know that many, many health professionals are leaving or taking extended breaks with proclamations like, "I can't do this anymore." Those in healthcare know this isn't a new problem, and it's not a COVID problem. But like so many things, the pandemic has certainly exacerbated it. Where there are many, ourselves included, working on different aspects of the problem, including how to bring more professionals into a system that is crumbling, others are focusing on how to heal and help those who remain. One of the words that holds a lot of focus is resilience. As defined by the APA, resilience is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands. Again, the concept and the need is not a new one, as our broader society has been looking at how to teach and build resilience in all parts of our population, from K to 12 to high-functioning adults. In short, we have long recognized this as the key life skill to being able to adapt to the real and intersecting stressors in life and our broader world. And the pandemic has only amplified this need, making it a critical commodity for our well-being and survival. The harder question, though, is how do you build or rebuild resilience when you're already in crisis? To discuss this, I'm joined by Milena Braticevic. Milena holds a Ph.D. in integral health from the California Institute of Human Science. She currently teaches programs on building mental resilience in uncertain times and psychological safety in the workplace at the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. Milena has also delivered her programs to a number of organizations, including the Ontario Public Health Association, Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, and the Ontario Association of Social Workers. She has contributed as a speaker on mental resilience for the Ontario Society of Occupational Therapists and the first National Safety Council Conference on Psychological Safety, Valuing the Whole Person. Milena's mental health literacy programs have helped individuals at various organizations and educational institutions build resilient minds and reduce the prevalence of common mental disorders and stigma. Hi, Milena. Welcome to the HQ.
Hi, Dale. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today to discuss a topic that is certainly of increasing importance and on the minds of many. So maybe if we could just start, beyond what I've shared from the APA, can you share your real world perspective on what is mental resilience and psychological safety?
Yes, sure. I can share my thoughts on that. So the definition is not that far off, the APA definition that that you just shared with us. Essentially, it's about the ability to adapt. So we're all experiencing a much higher degree of uncertainty and change in our workplaces as well as our lives. And so what we really need is to develop a sustainable way of adapting to those changes. The changes are going to persist, they're going to continue. We're living in sort of complex times. So mental resilience is about essentially developing this ability to adapt to a high degree of uncertainty and change. And in our workplaces, for that, we need a high level of psychological safety because we're looking at, how do we create a sustainable way of optimally working together? And that's going to involve creating an environment that's going to be safe for open communication, for our ability to define goals, to create new ways of doing things, and to really collaborate at a higher level.
And that's certainly been challenged then when you've got a pandemic going on and there's all this unpredictability in our healthcare organizations.
Yes. So maybe I can share a couple of things as far as data is concerned. Like you said, we're getting a lot of data, but data by itself doesn't really mean much unless we're acting on that data. And it's really important to act. So some of the recent data from Mental Health Research Canada tells us that about 35% of healthcare workers are experiencing high levels of anxiety. And this is from a poll that was done earlier this year. So if we have 35% of healthcare workers experiencing high levels of anxiety, that means that we're kind of beyond the clinical level with this high percentage of healthcare workers. And what that really means is that, once we're experiencing clinical level anxiety or higher, it means that we can no longer do things that we were able to do before. We can no longer function. We can no longer, we really don't have the energy for our daily tasks. So what we want to do is we want to reduce that, and we want to prevent further escalation of those symptoms. Some other data that I have shows that frontline healthcare workers are much more likely also to report experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder from the pandemic, while about 10% of other Canadians are experiencing some level of PTSD. Frontline healthcare workers are experiencing about 17%, so almost double severe symptoms of PTSD. And so, so these are all very important things that we need to address. We also have a recent, or actually the first national psychological safety poll by Mental Health Research Canada, which tells us that while 35% of Canadians are experiencing burnout, 66% of nurses are reporting being burned out. So again, twice as many. And also, interesting data says that about half of first responders feels that their work is inherently including a high degree of psychological risk. So we know that these are professions that, are going to lead to more burnout and things like that. So we need to have that in mind, that this is kind of built inherently in this in the healthcare field, and that's why it's even more important for us to discuss it.
Those numbers are alarming, certainly, I think, at any level. So, I mean, you talked about prevention, and so maybe we could go back to sort of how do you prevent something that's already happening, I guess, or where do you sort of see the opportunity to intervene in this?
So I think that overall, we need to have a prevention-oriented way of handling the situation. So while, for many people in healthcare and otherwise, things are at a kind of alarming clinical level, we need to adopt a prevention-oriented strategy that's going to work towards reducing symptoms as well as preventing further recurrences of anxiety and depression. So when it comes to prevention, one of the things I like to talk about is neuroplasticity. Just as kind of a basic, explanation of how our nervous system works, it's helpful to know that neuroplasticity really speaks to this ability of our mind to adapt and to, create new neural connections. So if we are, for example, starting to worry, if we have a lot of worrying thoughts and kind of fearful emotions, because of neuroplasticity, the more of those that we have, the more we're going to be able to have those same thoughts and emotions. So neuroplasticity speaks to our essentially constantly wiring our system for either, worry and stress and tension, or for a more relaxed kind of state of being that's, going to have some more positive emotions associated with it. So because of neuroplasticity, both anxiety and depression occur in stages. It's not that we have anxiety or don't have anxiety. We can have normal levels of anxiety, which, is kind of normal for this time, that we have some level of worry, or, one day we're worried about something specific. But if we have chronic anxiety, if we worry every day and about many different things, then we're much more likely to develop clinical level anxiety. And again, the longer we wait in kind of helping reverse our symptoms, the more difficult it will be, because our nervous system kind of wires these paths very strongly, right? So it's all about kind of becoming aware of, what is my level of worry? Am I able to relax? And how accessible is that for me? And looking at, helping ourselves early on.
Yeah, because I guess what I reflect is that certainly for people outside of the immediacy of the of the situation, it's easy for us to perhaps turn off the news, to remove ourselves from the situation so that we're not being bombarded with things that would be adding to our anxiety. Though I guess I would reflect that that's more of a coping strategy as opposed to building resilience in it. But for those that can't just turn the channel, right, or turn things off, how do you, I guess, more actively or specifically go about building that neuroplasticity or the capacity of bobbing and weaving a bit more?
Yeah. So, you actually pointed out something really important, which is that the news cycle has been cited as the number one cause of increased anxiety. This was based on a poll done by Mental Health Research Canada. So that's a good thing to kind of just notice. But in general, the question is, how do we build resilience? How do we create both physical and mental resilience? How do we improve on that? And the way I like to talk about that is through something called heart rate variability. It's a measure that many people might be already familiar with. Some smartwatches can measure heart rate variability.
Yes, I've got mine on.
Yeah, excellent. So, but heart rate variability is a measure of time in between heartbeats. And it shows us how quickly can we go from an active state into a state of relaxation. So how quickly can we switch? And this is really controlled by our autonomic nervous system. And what it shows is that if we have a healthy, resilient system, our heart rate variability will be high. We will have high oscillation patterns, and we will have stronger cardiovascular system, better ability to get a good night's sleep and recover and recharge, and that will improve our cognitive ability as well. But if we have a low heart rate variability, it means that this state of relaxation is not accessible to us. It's going to take a long time for us to be able to switch. And again, this is something that our nervous system, it doesn't just kind of go there. It's taught to do that over a long period of stress, chronic tension. The state of relaxation becomes less accessible to us. So if we have low heart rate variability, it means inability to relax, worsening symptoms of depression and anxiety, cardiovascular disease possibly, and just, again, lower resistance to both mental and physical stress. So one of the key things, and the reason why I like to use this metric, is to really show the importance of exercising that ability to access a relaxed state. That's called activating the relaxation response. And what does that mean to really be in that state of, health, and where we can kind of restore and just bring ourselves to a calm and composed state. And there are also some ways to kind of improve heart rate variability through daily activities I would like to share with you. That includes daily physical activity. Any kind of activity can really be good to improve our overall resilience. Also, finding a way to still the mind on the daily basis. And that means things like removing distractions, removing the news cycle for a bit, practicing kind of focused attention, maybe contemplation. Also, making sure that we're eating highly nutritious foods. So nutrition is very important as well, and that we're reducing toxins or, any kind of, stimulants such as coffee and things like that. And then spending time outside is really a good way to just naturally kind of rewire our system, and our nervous system really responds well to the random sights and sounds in nature. So that's really one of the best ways we can restore. And then being engaged in flow-based activities on a daily basis. So any activity that will have a process to it. Because again, we're kind of, we need to, with this prevention-oriented angle, we need to look at that things are a part of a process. Everything is going through a process of development and change, and we're an active part of that process.
Mm-hmm.
So practicing this flow state will help us learn how to essentially respond when needed. And that can be done through anything, such as, playing music or doing art activities, or even things like cooking, where we follow a recipe, and things like that.
Interesting. So, and I guess part of what I'm hearing from some of what you've described is that you're creating, I guess, some variability or randomness through these different types of activities, or some predictability as well, I guess, in some of the flow-based things that you're describing as well, but that they are working different kind of muscles within us, I guess, that we would use to, to withstand, or I guess by definition, create resilience. So that if you practice being unstable more often, that it makes it more easy to find your footing again when something else pushes you beyond that, or.
Yeah, I like the way you put that, because it kind of brings to light this fact that we are meant to be doing these things. Our body is meant to move, so we have to have that daily movement. We're meant to have healthy, nutritious foods and clean air and clean water. We're meant to have this ability to kind of still the mind. And the fact that we're really being bombarded by all kinds of ads and information and social media is really kind of taking us out of balance. So by stilling the mind on a daily basis, we can just regain that natural balance that we really desperately need to be sustainably healthy. And yes, it's kind of like, understanding that life is uncertain by nature. Maybe in the past, we would kind of typically worry about one uncertainty at a time, whereas now, because of COVID, the level of uncertainty is much, higher and broader as well. So those are some of the things that we can do. But, also, I don't want to kind of undermine the system and the environment that we're in. And how much that affects us, right? We can't be the only person kind of doing these things when everybody else is kind of maybe going another direction.
Fair. So maybe you could describe a little bit in terms of the role, I guess. So you're talking about this an intentionality to, I think, some of what you're describing here as well. So even though you're trying to simulate the randomness of some of these things, where is the role, I guess, of conscientiousness sort of play into this, and where does that take us?
Yes. So this is a really good question, because the healthcare field, by definition, has a higher degree of conscientiousness associated with it. Some of the fundamental values of a healthcare worker include things like commitment to integrity and ethical practice, commitment to excellence and justice in the healthcare system, and also commitment to, a high level of empathy and compassion and respect for the people that we work with. So all of these are kind of traits of highly conscientious people. And we have that trait really dominant in the healthcare field. Most people go into the field wanting to really help, wanting to do the right thing, wanting to make a difference. So if we have a high degree of conscientiousness, that can be a very useful thing, of course. We can kind of move ahead and help people and learn a lot of things. But we need to also be aware that people who have a high degree of conscientiousness are more prone to anxiety and depression if they're put in an environment where those values will be compromised, where basically they will not be able to exercise those values. And, usually people with a high degree of conscientiousness are kind of perfectionist. They fear failure. So if we put them in an environment with, things like unreasonable deadlines or working conditions where they're burned out and they can no longer feel compassion and empathy, right? Then we're essentially creating an environment where they will feel like they're failing. And so there will be a high degree of people leaving the profession, which is exactly what we're seeing today. I think some of the recent data shows that about a third of nurses in North America are considering changing their jobs at the end of the year because of high levels of burnout and a high stress working environment, which is really, again, what kind of brings that topic of psychological safety in the workplace. If we have a high stress work environment, that means that, we're constantly operating in the state of tension, in the state of fear, and that really reduces our ability to really, be authentic and be creative and be innovative and really contribute what we can to the workplace.
Yeah, that definitely resonates, Milena, and I thank you for that, because I mean, I've been hearing more stories than I care to, from my colleagues and others within the health system, reporting, their own colleagues, right, chiefs of staff and nurses, right, who have broken down in meetings crying and like just emotionally distraught, and things that they've never seen before from these people. And I think in one of the other podcast episodes, we were also having that conversation as well, and the challenge of, you have a calling, right, a true vocation of working in a field of taking care of people, and you can't do that to the degree that you feel ethically bound or morally responsible to. That is being reported certainly as being highly distressful. So
yes. Well, some of the reports I read were echoing that same thing. Basically, many nurses were reporting having anxiety attacks. They would feel physically ill going into work during the pandemic. They felt like they were going off to war or prison when they were going into work. And these are some of the statements that I've read. And for some of these people, really, quitting was the only way to ensure long-term well-being. And so we really, we need to really acknowledge that situation, and that this is, definitely affecting our ability to have a good system.
yeah, well, I think it like I said, I think it builds empathy. I hope it does build empathy with our listeners in terms of understanding what that psychological safety or a lack of safety might feel like for people who, feel like they can't perform their job the way they're supposed to, and how that would so traumatize one's psyche.
So yeah, maybe I can just give a bit more of a definition of psychological safety, and we can kind of go into it a little bit deeper.
Sure.
I think it's good to know that, definition is basically, the definition of psychological safety is that, when we are feeling psychologically safe, we believe that, it will not be held against us, so that we will not be punished if we speak our mind, if we are being authentic, if we're contributing our unique ideas in the work environment, and also that the environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So this interpersonal risk-taking means that we can safely voice our questions, our concerns, our ideas, even if it doesn't agree with the prevalent, way of doing things. So that is really important, because we need to be taking a certain level of interpersonal risk. We need to be able to do that safely in order to deal with this higher level of uncertainty and change and complexity in our workplaces. But I think it's important that to note that this will it's already becoming a key leadership skill. This ability to create a psychologically safe environment, an environment that's open for communication, for also expressing any challenges, and also for discussing what are the opportunities and maybe some concerns that people are having. And all of this with the goal of learning, quick learning and change, which is really what we're trying to do, and growth as well.
Yeah, and I think that there's probably different narratives or stories that are going on here that, through no fault of anyone's, right, that are perhaps contributing to this or working against them, in dual purposes, while you have some leaders who perhaps have gone into a kind of a command and control sort of approach to things, of trying to keep everything together, with their best intentions perhaps, but that maybe doesn't create the space for those to take risks as well without repercussions, right? In that space of high degree of rigidity,
Yeah.
that would play against that, I think, is what I'm hearing too.
Yes, and that's a very good point. Oftentimes, especially during these very difficult past couple of years, managers had to make very quick decisions, and decisions that were maybe controversial and that were not easy to make. And there's not enough time for everyone to be always informed about all the things that go into making a decision. But I think we can kind of those two things can coexist: psychological safety and managerial ability to make those decisions can go hand in hand with the ability of managers to kind of really show more appreciation, celebrate those achievements, do things, really acknowledge things that are going well, and to really, during this time especially, really go out of their way to really, again, show their appreciation towards healthcare workers that are really doing their best. Also, things like knowing that people need to be able to regenerate. They have to have the ability to sustainably, come into work at 100%. And really maintain that level of excellence that they're really committing to when they start the profession. So ensuring that people can take enough breaks, maybe that they have more flexible scheduling that will be working better for them, and also involving them in decision-making in some way. This is going to be really important because I talk to a lot of professionals and managers who really don't like to be blindsided by their people leaving, by being the last person to know if somebody's having a difficult time on their team. So really, it doesn't preclude from doing these things like more frequent wellness checks, more informal meetings where people can really express what is going on with them in their life. And again, communicating about true plans and common purpose in the workplace, and finding ways to involve healthcare workers and staff in decision-making and governance.
That's helpful, and sort of brings me back to, I guess, sort of a next question, sort of leading from that. So we're talking about the role of leaders in this space and the changes that are happening. So, I mean, do they have a role, or perhaps more organizationally, but certainly it's exercised by our leaders in terms of the process of change and development, and policy changes and things like that. So where does that flow into this, or their responsibility, or where do you see that sort of taking us?
Yes. So this is a really long discussion. We could talk about this for a long time. I will not have a full solution probably, but I did want to talk about something that I think is going on in the field, which can be addressed somehow, and that's this feeling of learned helplessness. You probably heard of that term before. Yep. Right. So learned helplessness is basically a psychological term when we believe that we cannot have any effect or change our circumstances, that basically no matter what we do, we will not be able to reach that level of excellence that we need. And then, essentially that feeling of learned helplessness is based on prior experiences of having no control over a situation. And I think this is something that's happening in our health with our healthcare workers. They just feel like that, no matter what I do, things will not change. And so as managers, it's very important to be aware of that, and then to really understand that this is a trait of pessimism. This is a pessimistic workforce that believes that, things will be permanent and things will always be like this. And we as managers have a responsibility to create a more optimistic outlook, and to really, find a way to address this learned helplessness by showing that, these are the ways that you can make a difference. These are the ways that you will be heard. These are the ways that we're creating change. And so creating this positive disposition, positive outlook that's based on real, implementations of things is going to be very helpful. So this is going to involve transparency. This is going to involve maybe a bit of a reduction in hierarchy, because wherever we have high levels of hierarchy, we have low psychological safety typically, because we have fear of, people who are superior to us. And what, again, psychology shows and cognitive science shows is that if we're experiencing chronic fear, that will reduce our ability to think and, act and be creative. We will be in this survival mode. And again, we're going to be a lot more prone to anxiety and depression and all those things, and burnout, which we want to avoid.
Yeah, and I can imagine like the challenge in this, and because we hear this as well, right, and through our social media, right, that for many of these healthcare professionals, they have seen so much. I mean, they've heard these stories before. Like I said at the outset, this is not new, and not because of the pandemic, right? So a lack of funding, a lack of support, a lack of so many of the number of resources that are necessary to support them in their roles is not a new problem. They've, many of them have dealt with, 0% sort of wage sort of increases, and yet there's inflation going on, and right. So there's probably a lot of us and them sort of in this, and then you have your leaders that are sitting in that space in between, trying to perhaps somehow protect, right, support their staff and their colleagues, all the while as the system itself is, the bad guy.
Yes, absolutely. Those are the things we need to be considering. And regarding, this process that we're in a process of change and development, even in healthcare, in the healthcare field. So it's very important to, as I said, try to develop a level of optimism that things can develop for the better, and then really work with what we have in a sustainable way, so that we can have a consistent policy change. But for this, it's important to know that this sustainable change will require everyone's input. So everybody's voice is really important. And I think for management, finding ways to really harness those voices, to really hear what people are saying, and then trying to have reasonable implementations can be helpful. But also, I really like to put the control into the hands of the people when it comes to mental health and psychological safety. So maybe even just to help ourselves to kind of heal from this learned helplessness, we can think about, how comfortable are we with interpersonal risk-taking, or, this really need to confront differences with others in ways that can lead to learning and change. And I can share a little bit of a maybe questionnaire with your listeners to really reflect on, how comfortable they are with this essential skill, really, of taking interpersonal risk. So maybe they can think about how comfortable are they communicating their goals and achievements to peers or their management. How comfortable are they speaking up or volunteering a concern to others, or giving feedback to a colleague? Do we do that on a regular basis, or do we kind of hold back? Also, how comfortable are we asking a coworker to clarify a particular point, especially in a Zoom meeting or, in a conference call? raising a different point of view in a conference call. How comfortable are we doing that? I think a lot of people are saying, when I have these online calls, I just kind of sit back, and it doesn't feel like I need to contribute as much sometimes, just even subconsciously. Also, how comfortable are we asking feedback from a colleague on a report that we did? And then, admitting when things are kind of going in the wrong direction, when things are, behind schedule, or when things are going wrong, or some things that we're noticing. Because in the healthcare field, this issue of psychological safety and feeling that we can say what we think can be a matter of life and death, right?
Mhm.
And oftentimes, we hold back because of that really lack of safety in the workplace.
Yeah, we certainly touch on that very importantly in the context of our work in patient safety and the importance of communication to be able to speak up as well. So yes, if you don't have that psychological safety, it can have very real and life and death consequences. But and thank you for sharing some of those questions. So I guess my question back to you is that if I was to take that questionnaire and I would answer that I'm not very comfortable with many of those things, what do I do?
That's a great question. So the question is why, and then we can have a longer discussion around, how much of it is up to me. Maybe develop a little bit of more assertiveness, maybe nonviolent communication, style of communication where we can really speak from a basis of needs, where we can say, okay, I need this in order to have that level of excellence that I'm really supposed to have, and empathy and compassion. So a part of that is our responsibility to communicate our needs in a non-conflicting way. And a part of that is, the responsibility of our management to really see and check the level of psychological safety on their team. What sometimes is helpful to know is that, different teams might have different levels of psychological safety. Also, the organization as a whole can have, a certain level of psychological safety. Your team might be doing better or worse compared to the organization. I think those are some of the things that we can really look at and even anonymously just survey as the first step. And then we can look at, well, what are these teams doing better, where people are really, feeling that they're safe to speak up and they're safe to really work at that highest level of collaboration, where we're not afraid of failure, where we are, learning together from each other all the time. So we can do a lot to kind of both measure and start kind of understanding our workforce better.
Yeah, and that certainly is reflected in some of the other conversations we've been having around equity, diversity, and inclusion as well. Right. And I think, that there's one is, I think, in your response to my question about what to do if you don't feel comfortable, is one is be curious, ask why, and then reflective. And there's that openness, I think, to sort of have that conversation with yourself or with the others that are part of your environment.
Yeah, and maybe just kind of tying to that need for openness. When we talk about personality traits, we talked about conscientiousness being one of them, and how cognitive science tells us that if we rate high in conscientiousness, we're at risk of higher levels of anxiety. But the opposite of that is this a trait of openness to experience, where we are essentially open to different points of view, different ideas, and we are not kind of focused on things having to be a certain way. And this trait of openness to experience shows, lower likelihood of anxiety and depression. And when we develop that trait more, our relapse rates are reduced. We're not as likely that we're going to relapse back into high levels of anxiety. So openness to new ideas, new experiences is really key. And our mindset, the way we look at one another, the way we perceive each other is really important in terms of, like you said, being curious and being open to knowing that other people will think differently. And that's great. We want to find out how they're thinking and how we can collaborate instead of being in this fear mode of, competition and things like that.
Yeah, this has been very helpful. So thank you for all of this, Milena. I think you've left us with a lot of positive approaches in the context of still recognizing that there are challenges and stressors and things that are going on here, but that certainly one of the messages that I am taking away from this is it's not too late, and so that even though we are in a crisis and people are feeling burnt out and they're feeling a lack of control and so many of these aspects, that some of these skills and opportunities that you're describing can still be employed, reverse, protect, and that I think as well is that they will be critically important for that dialogue as we try to find our way through this and come out the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I hope so. Thank you so much again for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And yes, I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Milena. Hope we'll have another chance to do this. So wish you well, and thank you again.
Thank you. Bye.
You've been listening to the HQ, and I'm Dale Sherback, your host. You can find this and other future episodes on the CHA Learning website, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. We'd love to hear what you think, so please follow us on our other social media channels. Thanks for joining us in this discussion today. Please join us next time.